Welcome back to the Closed Loop Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Deeney, and we will jump back into the second part of the episode on data versus deals. Intuitive-driven decision-making versus data-driven decision-making here in a second. I wanted to do a brief shout-out to my former colleague, Matt Widmeyer. He's moved on to a new position, but I really have enjoyed having him as my coworker. I've learned a ton from you, buddy. The chair is always here for you when you're ready to do more episodes with me. So, with that, thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of the episode.
That's a fun conversation I was having too with, a sales leader will come up and say, this doesn't work, stop doing it. But you actually have data in your back pocket saying it does work. And fair question though is asked, it's like, how do you know it doesn't work? Even though you kind of know in the back of your head, it's not a matter of like, it's not like a contest or anything like that, but it is like, I think you have a good idea, and I think that everyone's intention is well here, but I think that if maybe it didn't work in the past, but maybe that's changed. You have to also accept the fact that things change. In terms of like the marketing, marketing is gonna get data they don't need. That's just part of it. The main thing is like, okay, did something get learned one way or another? If the answer is yes, then cool. And it's not about the one extra data point for that one extra person. It's about getting enough from everybody to be able to accurately change or not change something. And that should be done by scale. If you have one data point, it might not help that one person, but if it helps the other 5 or 6, and now it's a new process that we have in place based on that, that could be the difference of thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars for the company over the course of a year. So it's a matter of scale. It's not a matter of like that one time that they were about to go to lunch and then you walked over and told them about this new thing we're introducing. It's about the big picture. And if it is about the big picture, you want the other leaders in the organization, at least the main point person in sales, should take the time to understand it and then let their team know why it's important instead of just griping about having to do one extra thing. And then, obviously if the sales leaders are having that conversation all the way up to, depending on the size of your organization, all the way up to maybe even the owner, right? Like, hey, this isn't happening. I really need this. Can you help me out? Usually the answer, yeah, it's all about selling. Even though marketing isn't technically in sales, you're still going to have to sell somebody on why we should be doing something a little bit differently for the sake of learning. It's both teams have skin in the game, absolutely. And the end goal, like you said, is deals are the end goal, because without deals, the company doesn't stay afloat. So how do we make more deals happen? Salespeople have to absolutely understand the value that marketing provides, and marketing has to understand what salespeople do on a daily basis. It's a two-way street.
So you make a really good point, so it's kind of hard for me to make the counterpoint.
That was my goal.
So here's a little argument against what you're saying, because what you're saying is great. But just from like so many examples, we could have data that conclusively, almost beyond a doubt, shows significantly that something is either not working or is working. And if we did more of something or less of something, it would have an overwhelmingly positive impact. It could be totally obvious that something is going to make a significant impact on the overall business. It's going to sell more. Let's say the data shows this. And let's say the marketing team, let's say to another team, it's like, oh man, this is my golden ticket. Okay. That comes to the sales team, that goes to another team, that goes to their management, then go all the way up the chain. Why would the company not do something about it? Now, one of the big reasons that can happen is that a company and a team is strained in its leadership capital. So if the change requires leadership or teams to adjust in some way that they're just unwilling to do, they're inflexible to do, it requires too much for them to actually make a difference on. Or if, look, their manager is like, look, I can't ask them to do that. I can't police that. I can't enforce that. If it's an unenforceable thing, I can't make it a rule. It's just inherent, right? So even if the data says, look, there's jolly rainbows at the end of this, there's a treasure chest, all you have to do is follow this path. Why in the world wouldn't they do that, right? The other side is going to be like, well, I can't ask my team to gather that. I can't ask my team to do that. I don't have any management capital. And by that, I mean, I can't ask my team to do any more. I've already strained my ability to ask them. I'm whipping them. I'm forcing them to do something, and I can't ask them to do another thing. And I'm spent, and I can't. So that's a separate problem, right, than the data problem. It's a separate one. That's a leadership management problem to tackle. But at the end of the day, it's like, man, I just brought them the path to the treasure map, and they're not willing to go do it. And that can feel really frustrating. So that would be a point, I would say, that could come up in a company, in a business, is that they could have all of the signs and all the data in the world to show them that there's something that's going to vastly increase their selling. But to them, they're gonna weigh things, not necessarily costs. They're gonna weigh things against that may come up and say it's just too costly. But it's not the dollars that are too costly. It's this is not a team that can do that.
Right. So it's usually salesperson. And as a disclaimer, I'm a salesperson at heart. I always have been.
We're not bashing the sales side.
But salespeople everybody knows for the most, very generally speaking, they're allergic to change. And when it's because they all have there's a CRM process, but they all have their process and the way they do things. And a lot of them are successful at what they do. So if I'm a sales leader, and even if you are bringing me that golden ticket, if my top performer, Tommy, only works off spreadsheets and does things his own way, and he makes me look really good because he consistently sells every single month, he doesn't need your data point, is basically what that's saying, right? But which is the wrong message to convey. But that's where things start getting tricky, right? It's like we're making exceptions for some and not for others, and there's no universal rollout of this process. My advice to the marketing people out there is to absolutely introduce new things, but do it in small, little bite-sized chunks. If you introduce 5 new fields at once, good luck. It's probably not going to happen. Now, you can require the fields most CRMs have the ability to put a requirement on these fields. But then if it's not a data point that's collected over the phone or through email or whatever, it's going to be a bogus thing anyway. And then you're back to where you started, which is not being able to rely on the data. So I would say, and we do a pretty good job of it here. Just, we aren't trying to change the world overnight. It's just like, hey, I wonder what this would look like if we got this and stuff. It's usually no more than like 1 or 2, at a time, and it doesn't happen, very frequently. I'd say a couple times a year, tops. So, just very, very, very gradual process.
I think what's important here too is we're kind of throwing this bone at the management side of any team. The reps may not have full control over in a lot of what we're discussing here, right? Like they're just like, look, I'm at the whims of what I need to sell. So whatever my billing, my accounting, my company needs me to do to sell, that is absolutely a minimum. The things that you're asking me to do in addition, they better be important to my manager. My manager better be like, yeah, I want you to do this, because otherwise, it's getting in the way of selling. There's this really painful stat, comes from Salesforce. You have it too, Matt. Sales reps spend only 34%, so roughly a third of their time on selling activities, right? So a third of the time on selling activities. So what's the other 2/3? So only a third is spent selling. You're a salesperson, only a third of your time is spent selling. So what is the other time being spent on, right? Well, if it's administrative, data entry, if it's, walking over to someone, having meetings, like what's getting in the way? And if you're a leader, your manager, like, well, I'm not adding anything more to taking away from their selling time. So like you said, it's got to make sense to that sales team, that sales manager, especially if they're trying to guide and manage their team. If the sales manager is just kind of there to, I don't know, hoorah the team, it's not going to matter to them anyway. The management's goal for a team that they are over would be to help and improve what they're doing. And if it's, look, my job is to help my team be more efficient, data is a huge impact on that. But if it's not, learning your own organization is kind of a big thing for at least any team that wants to work better or more collaboratively with the sales organization.
Yeah, I mean, there's different kinds of managers too, right? There's people managers who are really good at getting the rah-rah going, keeping the morale up and keeping everyone motivated. And there's data managers. Data managers are buried in spreadsheets and dashboards and reporting and all that stuff. And that's, you need to look at both. You need to look at what's going on the dashboard and what's happening outside of the dashboard. You need to get feedback and figure out, hey, how's this going? And, it's tough, but you do need, I think the ideal manager should be a combination of both. They're making good business decisions based on data that is being collected and presented to them. And while they're simultaneously keeping the morale up on their team. It's not an easy job to juggle both those things, but that would be, I don't know if you'd agree here, but that would be based on my experience, I think that would be the ideal manager.
Yeah, because that's a repeatable, trainable, scalable, standardized. The other thing here is like, okay, so let's say there's a recipe for, if I was put together as a marketing side, as another part of the business, you want to improve sales. You want to help sales. You want to understand what's going on there. You really do need to have that conversation. Okay, what's your process? What's going on? How do you do things? What's required of you? What things does your manager pay attention to? That's really another good way to start. But other things are like, well, what parts along their process are really contributing to value and what parts are not, right? Like what's the 34% they're spending on selling activities and what's the other stuff? Like knowing what meetings they have may not be that important to you, but knowing what the whole projects and stuff they are involved in might be. So how you're going to work with that team, how you're going to work with a selling organization is going to come down a lot of times to having a bearing on the closing of a deal. So,
absolutely, yeah.
And so from their side, it's how are you going to help me?
That's what it comes down to. You need to be able to ready and able to answer that question too. It's not as quick as they'd like, no matter how you slice it. Usually, right? It's usually an overtime period of thing. But you also do, it's funny because it should be the sales. If you come to us, if I'm a sales leader and you come to me with something that could change my team, I want my team to do that. Period. Right. So the other side of the coin is like, oh, well, Tommy, again, number one rep is Tommy, who works off only spreadsheets. Well, Tommy, can you fill out this data point? Because I think we can close a lot more deals like this. Tommy's like, yeah, I get lost. I'm just going to keep doing my thing. The manager's not going to get, if he keeps closing month over month, it's a very hard conversation for a sales manager to have, right? Because maybe they're even buddies. Maybe they go golfing on the weekends or whatever, right? It's a tough conversation for a sales manager to have but it's what kind of consequence are you going to introduce, right? To this person, this overperformer, not doing a marketing activity. And it's interesting because I've seen this a few times, and it's usually, it might be a stern conversation at the very most, but then it's usually it usually doesn't help a whole lot. So there are other things that can be done, but it does need to be enforced. It's on the salespeople, it's on the sales leaders who are going to be benefited the most by this golden ticket scenario that need to be enforcing this. And it's a tough pill to swallow, but if you hold everybody, overperformers and underperformers, to the same standard and roll this out as a global change, sales managers will put their spin on it. Look, I don't like it either, but trust me, it's gonna work. If I'm a salesperson, No one's ever going to get fired over it. It's just, again, it's a tough thing it's a tough ask, but for some things, but again, allergic to change. So you have to choose your battles, and in a situation like that, it's like, okay, maybe we can just get that data point from everyone else except for that one person. And then eventually the cream will rise to the top. but it sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Right. So, yeah, that's the unfortunate truth of everything happening. But it is, because by having that conversation, and worse, okay, so what happens if you do, okay, I'm going to write you up if you don't put that data point in that field. So now you're creating this perfectly happy employee has now taken like a morale hit. And then even the other people around the team are like, man, what's going on here? It's like, this is getting weird. And this used to be fun. And now they're just like making us do all these weird things. So it's going to, again, you have to choose your battles. But I think that the best thing, small, gradual tweaks, and they need to be held accountable, because you aren't going to come over as a marketer and go over to the sales team and be like, hey, how come you didn't put this in this field? That's not your job to do that. It's your job to come over with recommendations. And then it's up to the sales leaders to be able to implement some of these things to make us all win.
Yeah. So we'll go into like the final concluding bits here, but let me just totally slam the gut intuitive driven organization for a second here. I'm just going to totally slam that argument. All right. And then we can do that on the other side if we want, and then go totally pro that side. So here's the total anti-intuitive driven argument, right? So if you're a selling organization and you're going off intuitive driven, I'm not saying 100%, but if you're leaning more toward the intuitive driven side, okay, what that creates is like a culture, a pressure on your sales team to constantly have the right, almost perfect intuition at all times. It also requires the manager to not quite know how to train their team perfectly, but to rely more on gut. It's kind of like it's so much like football teams, right? It's not knowing exactly how fast your teams are running, how many plays and things have been executed well, how well they've done on certain downs in certain places and certain combinations of players. It's just sort of watching them and then, intuitively making the assumption, taking in the information, assessing, what's happened, and making kind of guesses and estimates. Now, the track record from any study is that human beings are absolutely terrible at making predictions. They're absolutely terrible at assessing risk. They just kind of do maybe whatever they just recently saw. Oh, we played against a team that, did a lot of things that worked well against us. In a bubble, that's like just taking that information it's not 100% helpful all the time. So intuitive driven selling just has so many pitfalls of being repeatable, because it's not necessarily repeatable every time, right? There's so many possible customers, possible patients, possible everything. And it's so much easier to standardize, quantify just some of the basic points along the journey and see how we can impact and influence those things. If you don't simplify everything down, you're really dealing with everything. And if you ask, if I'm on the marketing side and I go over to the sales team and I have a meeting with them and I say, hey, I'd like to know what's going on, what's going to happen with you guys. Can you tell me what your initiatives are, what projects you're doing, what you're like, how things have been going with the stuff I've given you. And all they have is just, let me just think for a minute. Okay, let me just tell you from, a few minutes of thinking about it, everything you need to be successful. It's never going to be good. It's not going to be great conversations. It's going to be purely anecdotal. It's not rich. It's not filled with the context. Like the intuitive driven side is like, look, no other team could understand us. There's no way they get the context into what we're doing and how we're selling and how they're going to influence and impact us. Well, the flip side is if we don't know if the other teams don't know what's going on, if they don't understand even any context, any valuable context, they don't get enough context, there's no way they're going to know. And it creates barriers on both sides. So to me, intuitive driven creates, let's say, 4 massive problems. One, it makes it so that it's really hard to make the right decisions because most of them are going to be coin flips. Second, it makes it almost impossible for other teams to work with you. So it almost bashes cross functionality and throws it out the window. You're basically going to be a sales team operating in a silo. Your salespeople are going to have to do the marketing. They're going to have to do the selling. They're going to have to do the support. Like, you're piling so much on. You thought you were going to spend more time selling. Wrong. The next one is culture and sustainability. You are in no way creating a culture that new people can come into and learn quickly. It's really hard to make your team more efficient without, the right information and data. And sometimes if something goes wrong, you may not know what the heck's going on. And last, forecasting, predictions. So you kind of end up, you can't be strategic when you're only living day to day, when you're week to week, when, at the end of the month, you're like, oh man, I hope we hit our numbers. You should know like a pretty good, you can even know a few weeks, months ahead of time with pretty high confidence what's going to happen if you understand your pipeline. So you can have the answers, you can be way more strategic, and you can make decisions that impact the flow, right? At a time and a point where it's actually going to make a difference. So that is my very brutal slam of why being highly intuitive driven is just terrible for an organization.
Yeah, and if you don't want to look at data, you might want to hire a fortune teller as a sales operations person.
Hey, the monkey, or the octopus picking bets, right? In Vegas was more successful than every other human hedge fund manager or better. It was incredible.
Give them their own office with their own crystal ball and everything. Oh man. This has been fun. This is one of the this is definitely one of the juicier ones, and this is a very debatable thing. I mean, I would be surprised if anyone listening to this has not experienced this to some degree at their organization. So this has been a fun one for me.
Yeah, I'll just quickly name a few things that are wrong if you're too data driven. We think we've laid them out. You're going to alienate the sales team. If you have data that doesn't connect to deals, you're just wasting time. It's got to make sense. It's got to be able to, show value there. It's got to mean more than just to your team. It's got to mean something to the whole company. And in addition, there's, how complex is it? It's really important that everyone on the sales team, everyone on the marketing team, everyone on whatever team understands what all the data points mean. If you look at a data point and you're like, what does this mean again? Like, you may have been told and you just forget, that's fine. But if you have no idea what all this stuff is that you're gathering, that's a huge red flag. Why am I gathering this data point? Like, why do I care this person's name, right? Like, there's a reason behind that, and it's pretty important to know. It is helpful for you, but, it's, and the last one is like, teams are stretched usually with resources and time or management capital. So having a, good assessment, like, okay, right now this team's underwater, probably not a good time to ask them to gather data, just like you've mentioned. So, that comes from a little bit of collaboration, communication, both sides. If it has to involve like leadership at the top to force it to happen, not my favorite way for that to happen, but it can happen. So that's probably the slam against both sides. A little bit brief on the data side, but data is I'm just a fan of the data, and there's so many times learning this along the way that even if you're a fan and you have the treasure map and you feel like you're just going to change the world, take the world by storm, it just doesn't end up happening because there's a lot more involved than just simply, more data does not always mean more deals, and more deals do not always come from the gut.
Yeah, it's funny too, because you see, I wish we had enough examples of someone who's very good at using a CRM and they're like a rock star salesperson. It's usually the opposite. They're usually either really good at the CRM, not so good at selling, or they're not, they don't use CRM nearly as much as they should be, but they are, they do sell a ton. So it's like, it's tough because it doesn't paint a very good picture for what we're trying to convey here. I wish we had more case studies, but it's like, yeah, it tells a bad story, right? For the people who are entering everything in perfectly, and they aren't having that much luck on the sales side. It's unfortunate, but it does happen that way too.
There are tools designed to help you get back leadership management capital, like tools that help analyze your team for you, teams that tell you what your team is doing, tools that may even gather information from, conversations that are happening with your team, with customers and stuff. and so that they don't have to be the ones doing all the data entry. And there's a lot of stuff out there designed to try to help a team, a management, a leadership role person, anything like that, to make sure that they're getting the data. If you need data, if the company needs it and the team won't do it, they're probably going to go force another team to do it. And it's unfortunate if you turn like entire operations around the sales team to do the things the sales team should be doing. It's unfortunate, but I've seen it. It happens.
Yeah, those companies you're talking about too they're just taking over the market too, and now that everything's going remote and everything, that's becoming a lot more of a need than it was in the past too. So that's there are definitely tools out there that you can use to do that.
So I would say, find the right combination of data that is the most meaningful, that you could take action on, that you plan to take action on, that you were important to measure, that people understand down through the organization, and that will ultimately impact the closing or the selling of more revenue for your organization. Now, if it's like pick a side, like, okay, pick the data side or pick the intuition side, I'm on the data side. I'm just going to be forthcoming. But it's not like pure data is going to be the winner, and it's not like intuition is going to be the winner. There's some right combination of that, and that kind of depends on management, leadership styles, culture in the company, and a lot of other factors. So, is there anything else, Matt, you want to say that we may have missed?
Yeah, no, I think we nailed it. I think we've been going back and forth, and I think just small bite-sized chunks would be my advice. Build value on both sides and do the ride along. It's a little bit harder, especially if you have remote teams now. It's a little harder to do it, but take the time to understand what the other person goes through on a daily basis. And it's kind of like what, if you ever apply to be part of the police force or something like that, the ride along, the physical ride along in the police car is like, are you sure you want to do this? Or are you sure you want to? It's kind of the same type of thing. Do the ride along with your marketing guy, or with one of the salespeople, and kind of figure out, hey, why is this? Maybe you thought it was going to be a really simple thing for those couple extra data points. Maybe it's super cumbersome on there, based on their experience. So, just take the time step outside of the numbers, and I guess just look at what's actually going on, I guess would be my advice to both sides, really.
I would also say if you're a manager of one of those teams, including a manager of another team or someone from the other team into into a weekly, monthly, I don't know how often you have a team meeting or something, clues them in into what's important. That's sometimes a pretty good way to just do it. And they could just be a fly on the wall, right? You don't have to take any extra time to do anything. That could be the very simplest step to involving, increasing collaboration. They may have ideas for your business, or be like, oh, why? We don't need these other, you guys have been gathering these data points? I didn't even know. There's a lot of things that happen there. So this has been a very in-depth back and forth debate on whether anyone should be focusing more data or more deals. So with that, we'll close out. So thanks, Matt. And thank you for listening to the Close the Loop podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody.